I transferred my entire retirement balance on a chilly Thursday morning, and by noon, my daughter-in-law's corporate card was abruptly declined at a boutique organic market across town. The notification from my son, Julian, came in right at 12:45 p.m., his voice carrying that familiar, tense edge of confusion and sudden panic. I let the phone ring 4 times against the polished wood of my hallway credenza, just long enough to feel the heavy hum of the device in my palm and let the vibration settle through the floorboards. That brief pause wasn't meant to be cruel. It was simply a moment to gather my composure, a final, quiet breath before the stable reality I had inhabited for decades tilted completely off its axis. This entire ordeal hadn't materialized out of nowhere. It had begun nearly a year prior, not with a sudden crisis, but with the sleek, whisper-quiet hum of an imported espresso maker. Valerie, my only son's wife, had brought the appliance over one crisp autumn Saturday afternoon, proudly setting the chrome and black machine down on my warm oak countertops. It looked entirely out of place next to the hand-painted ceramic trivet my late husband, Arthur, had glazed for me during our very first community pottery workshop 30 years ago. "Elena, you really shouldn't have to carry the mental load of managing a household anymore," she had insisted, her tone as perfectly smoothed out as the velvety foam she was pouring into a demi-tasse cup. Julian and I were discussing it over dinner. With Arthur gone, staying on top of the property taxes, the quarterly HVAC servicing, and the garden maintenance is simply too much administrative friction. We just want to make your daily life effortless. Deep grief has a peculiar way of rendering a person profoundly susceptible to well-packaged persuasion, efficiently sanding down the sharp, protective instincts we rely on. Arthur had been gone for a little over 14 months at that point, and the sprawling house still felt hollow, the profound quiet echoing like a physical weight in every corner. During our marriage, Arthur had managed our investments and ledgers not out of any unilateral control, but because he genuinely enjoyed the meticulous order of balanced columns. After his passing, stepping into that administrative role felt less like maintaining order and more like navigating an endless archive of his absence. So when Valerie casually proposed establishing a linked secondary checking account connected to my primary savings, her proposition sounded less like an intrusion and more like genuine familial care. Under her plan, Valerie would be listed as an authorized secondary user, allowing her to easily automate monthly payments for my municipal water, electricity, and landscape upkeep, or pick up staple groceries if bad weather kept me indoors. It sounded thoroughly modern, remarkably efficient, and entirely practical. "We will simply set up an automated transfer of a modest fixed sum each month to handle the baseline expenses," she explained, her manicured hands gliding effortlessly as she arranged artisan coffee pods into a rotating stainless steel rack. "Think of it as a streamlined household stipend. You won't ever have to look at a bill or log into a portal again. It will simply run in the background." Julian had stood quietly by the kitchen threshold, nodding with that familiar expression of mingled relief and admiration he always wore whenever Valerie introduced one of her grand organizational initiatives. As an established commercial architect working grueling 60-hour weeks, the comforting thought that his wife was efficiently managing his widowed mother's affairs brought him immense peace of mind. I remember a faint, cool tightening in the center of my chest, a small warning flutter. For over 30 years, I had built a successful career as a senior compliance auditor for a major regional banking federation, specializing specifically in multi-party account authorization oversight and internal fraud detection. I understood better than most that the narrow margins separating convenient administrative access from profound financial exposure is often a microscopic fracture that can easily widen into an irreversible chasm. But this was Valerie, the woman my beloved son had chosen, and the mother of my clever granddaughter, Chloe. To hesitate or question her motives felt like an unacceptable indictment of my own family. For the first 6 months, the arrangement operated exactly as Valerie had described, with the monthly statements reflecting tidy utility settlements and minor household expenditures. But then, right around the turn of the half-year mark, I noticed an unfamiliar line item appearing with metronomic regularity on the 15th of every month, an outgoing transfer of precisely $2,800, tersely categorized under general household expenses. The initial time that entry caught my eye, I assumed it must have been earmarked for some unavoidable, unexpected domestic repair. Perhaps a hidden plumbing leak or emergency roofing patches that Valerie had quietly managed on my behalf. I fully intended to bring it up during our next Sunday family dinner, but between Chloe's district science fair and Julian's firm securing a massive commercial contract, the fleeting thought vanished beneath the warm, pleasant current of ordinary family life. When the exact same line item materialized the following month, another $2,800 to the exact penny, that faint, cool flutter in my chest hardened into a distinct, sharp knot. Decades spent navigating compliance audits and detecting internal financial irregularities train the mind to operate like an orderly archive where randomness is treated as mere background noise, but strict consistency is always an urgent signal. Legitimate household operational costs never exhibit that kind of sterile uniformity. Water usage fluctuates with the seasons, grocery store totals vary wildly, and structural repairs are inherently isolated events. A fixed, repeating withdrawal of $2,800 month after month was not an expense at all. It was a structured installment. Acting on an instinct I couldn't ignore, I unlocked Arthur's heavy metal filing cabinet, pulled the previous year's archived bank statements, and spread them across the dining table under the pale afternoon sunlight filtering through the sheer curtains. Working methodically backward month by month, my stomach dropped as I realized this pattern hadn't started 2 months ago. It had been running continuously for 12. For a full year, while I was navigating the heavy, disorienting fog of my first year of widowhood, that exact sum had been steadily drained from my life savings every single month. My fingertips turned ice cold as I stared at the paper trail, recognizing the textbook signature of a slow, methodical financial erosion disguised as routine administrative help. Throughout my career, I had sat across a polished desk from countless bewildered retirees, gently walking them through the devastating reality of how a trusted relative's assistance had quietly morphed into a down payment on a luxury vehicle or private debt consolidation. I had always felt a detached professional sorrow for them, never once imagining that I would eventually find myself sitting alone at my own kitchen table on the wrong side of the ledger. That evening, I skipped dinner entirely, letting the local evening news broadcast hum quietly to myself while I ran the calculations over and over in my head. $2,800 a month for 14 straight months added up to a staggering $39,200. The following morning, I lifted the telephone and dialed Marcus Vance, a brilliant forensic investigator who had started at the Regional Federation the same year I did and had eventually stepped into my former department head position. "Marcus," I said quietly the moment he answered. "It's Elena." His tone shifted instantly from casual warmth to sharp, professional focus as he recognized my voice. I gave him the routing details of the linked secondary account, asking him to trace the ultimate destination of those recurring monthly withdrawals. Less than an hour later, my cell phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, and Marcus delivered the confirmation without preamble. The automated transfers were funneling directly into an exclusive, high-limit platinum credit card registered solely to Valerie Davis Vance. The following morning, I called Arthur's former firm to request a formal audit of our remaining personal accounts, needing to ensure there were no other invisible tethers binding my security to anyone else. Mr. Vance, Marcus, had kept his promise to pull the complete multi-month trace log, and I arranged to meet him downtown at a quiet, unassuming diner where no one from our professional past would ever wander. He arrived precisely on time, sliding a plain manila envelope across the Formica tabletop before our coffee even arrived. I didn't need him to spell out the details. The highlighted rows on the transaction logs spoke with clinical precision, tracking every single dollar straight from my retirement reserve into Valerie's platinum card account month after month. It was the methodical work of someone who assumed I was too aged, too grief-stricken, and too trusting to ever scrutinize the ledger lines. After thanking Marcus and folding the documents back into their envelope, I drove directly to a regional branch office across town and established an entirely new account under my sole name, transferring every remaining cent away from the compromised institution. By the time I returned home, the afternoon sunlight was casting long, sharp shadows across the hallway, and my phone began to vibrate against the credenza. It was Julian, his tone tight, strained, and laced with acute anxiety as he asked if I was available for an immediate family conference. Valerie had apparently attempted to pay for an exclusive order at a high-end design showroom earlier that afternoon, only to find her card completely rejected, and she had immediately called my son in tears, claiming that my automated household stipend had somehow suffered a catastrophic glitch. I kept my voice utterly calm, telling Julian that there was no technical glitch whatsoever and instructing him to have Valerie present at my front door by 10 o'clock the following morning. Though Julian stammered objections, pleading for an explanation over the phone, I held firm, reminding him simply that some conversations require a face-to-face reckoning. That evening, I walked through the quiet rooms of the house, boxing up the few expensive cosmetics and designer garments Valerie had left in our guest suite over the prior months, systematically clearing away every trace of her presence. When morning arrived, her white luxury vehicle pulled up the drive precisely on schedule, and she stepped out onto the porch with her usual brisk, purposeful stride, her expression already calibrated to project wounded indignation. Marcus Vance had delivered the forensic trace report directly into my hands at the diner, exposing every single monthly extraction that had drained my reserve accounts for over a year. Armed with those verified transaction logs, I severed my ties with the original institution and moved my remaining capital into a secure, single-name portfolio across town. When Julian's anxious phone call arrived that afternoon, frantic over Valerie's rejected card at a high-end design showroom, I kept my tone unyielding and ordered them both to my front door by 10 o'clock the following morning. I spent the remainder of that afternoon quietly clearing out every last personal belonging Valerie had ever left in my guest quarters, packing her items into cardboard boxes and setting them by the hallway threshold. When her white luxury SUV pulled into my driveway precisely on schedule the next morning, she stepped out with that familiar, rehearsed posture of righteous indignation, clearly expecting to bully her way through whatever minor inconvenience she assumed had occurred. I opened the door before she could knock, stepping back to let her stride into the kitchen where I had deliberately left the manila envelope resting on the Formica tabletop. Her gaze snagged instantly on the stark brown folder, and the practiced mask of innocent confusion flickered for a fraction of a second, revealing a sudden, sharp edge of panic behind her eyes. "Ione, what on earth is going on?" she demanded, her voice carrying an artificial shrillness as she dropped her expensive leather handbag beside the chair. "Julian said you refused to explain over the phone, but my card was declined in the middle of a business purchase, and all the household automation is tied to that account." "Sit down, Valerie," I said, my voice dropping into the steady, unyielding register I used to command during compliance hearings. She stiffened, hesitating before slowly lowering herself into the chair opposite the envelope, refusing to look directly at the documents. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the old percolator, ignoring the sleek espresso machine she had originally brought into my home as a Trojan horse 14 months ago. Without a word, I slid the summary sheet across the table, followed immediately by the itemized monthly trace logs Marcus had pulled from the Federation's secure archives. For the past 14 consecutive months, I said, leaning forward with my hands resting flat on the table, an automated transfer of exactly $2,800 has been siphoned out of my primary account on the 15th of every day. The descriptions were falsely logged as standard domestic maintenance. Valerie stared rigidly at the wall, her jaw tightening as the silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. "I don't know what you're looking at," she whispered, her fingers nervously pleating the fabric of her silk blouse. "There must be a glitch in the bank's processing software. Maintenance costs go up, Ione. Roof repairs, landscaping contracts, specialty contractors." "There was no roof repair, Valerie," I interrupted, my tone cutting through her excuses like a scalpel. "And my landscape service is billed at a fixed rate that I paid directly by check. I have every single receipt. The money wasn't going into this house." Valerie's eyes darted frantically around the kitchen, her composure entirely evaporated as the ugly truth closed in around her. If it wasn't for the house, then it was for Julian's architectural firm. He's had so many overhead expenses, and I wanted to relieve his stress without burdening him, she blurted out, her voice cracking with desperate self-preservation as she tried to shift the blame onto her husband. "Julian knows nothing about this," I stated quietly, leaning back in my chair with absolute conviction. "This money wasn't supporting his business, Valerie. It was fueling your independent venture, your luxury design studio across town, the one the financial journals reported was on the verge of collapse." At the mention of her commercial studio, she flinched as though struck physically, the color draining entirely from her cheeks as the last of her defenses crumbled into dust. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with dry, ragged sobs that sounded entirely devoid of genuine remorse. They were the tears of someone mourning the loss of her supply line, not her integrity. "You don't understand the relentless pressure," she choked out through her palms, her voice small and pathetic. "The commercial lease, the artisan inventory, the social media expectations. Everyone assumes I'm a roaring success. And your solution to maintain that illusion was to steal systematically from a widowed retiree who trusted you?" I asked, my tone remaining level and chillingly composed. "I was going to pay every penny back," she snapped defensively, her head jerking up with a flash of displaced anger. "As soon as our spring collection cleared, I planned to return the funds. You wouldn't have even noticed the balance shift. In that precise moment, the final illusion shattered completely." She wasn't sorry for the deception. She was only furious that her unmonitored access had been permanently cut off. My hard-earned life savings hadn't been viewed as a family safety net, but rather as an infinite unbilled line of credit for her vanity. $39,200 is not a temporary loan, Valerie, I said firmly, sliding the final institutional document across the wooden surface to rest beside her cold coffee cup. "It is a legally documented debt, and the account holding it has already been permanently closed for cause." I sat in the quiet kitchen until the afternoon light began to fade through the window panes, the heavy silence finally feeling less like a wound and more like an open space cleared of debris. The confrontation with Valerie was over, and the frantic calls from Julian had tapered off into a grim acceptance of reality as he processed the full extent of the betrayal. He came by again just as the sun dipped below the horizon, looking years older, his shoulders weighed down by the collapse of a marriage he had believed was built on partnership rather than extraction. We sat together at the table where the manila envelope had rested hours earlier, drinking simple black coffee and speaking in low, measured tones about the next steps. He filed for a legal separation by the end of the week, choosing to distance himself completely from the Fayetteville studio and the web of financial liabilities Valerie had accumulated behind his back. She packed her remaining belongings from their home while he was at his architectural firm and moved away to stay with relatives out of state, disappearing from our daily lives just as cleanly as she had exited my kitchen. The weeks that followed brought a strange, steady peace back to the rooms Arthur and I had filled with ordinary routines over decades. I finalized the transfer of my remaining pension and savings into the secure portfolio at the downtown institution, ensuring that my independence rested entirely on solid ground once more. Without the constant, silent drain on my accounts, the monthly balance sheets regained their natural rhythm, reflecting only the true, honest costs of living. Marcus stopped by for lunch at a local diner one Tuesday afternoon to check on me, sliding no envelopes across the table this time, but simply offering a warm smile and the quiet solidarity of two people who had spent a lifetime learning how to spot the hidden fractures in human behavior. I thanked him for his discretion, knowing that without his swift assistance, I might have spent the rest of my retirement drifting through a fog of manufactured debt. Julian and I established a new cadence to our relationship, spending quiet weekends on the back porch watching the evening birds settle into the oak trees, speaking openly about the future without the polite fictions that used to gloss over our gatherings. He admitted that he had been so eager to see me cared for that he had ignored the glaring warning signs of Valerie's extravagant spending, blinded by the comfortable narrative she'd constructed around her modern lifestyle brand. I reminded him that grief and love often make us vulnerable to anyone who promises to smooth away the rough edges of daily survival, and that true strength lies not in never stumbling, but in refusing to let someone else dictate the terms of your survival. The house slowly lost its hollow, echoing quality, replaced once again by the steady, unhurried heartbeat of a home that belonged entirely to me. The weeks following Valerie's departure brought a quiet, steady equilibrium back to the house, settling into the familiar rhythms Arthur and I had established decades ago. I finalized the transfer of my remaining capital into the secure portfolio at the downtown financial institution, ensuring that my independence rested entirely on solid, unshakable ground once more. Without the constant, silent drain bleeding out my accounts every month, my statements regained their natural clarity, reflecting only the true, honest expenses of everyday life. Marcus stopped by for lunch at a corner diner one Tuesday afternoon to check on my peace of mind, sliding no manila envelopes across the table this time, offering instead a warm smile and the quiet solidarity of two veterans who had spent a lifetime learning how to spot the hidden fractures in human nature. I thanked him sincerely, knowing that without his swift professional assistance, I might have spent the rest of my golden years drifting through a dense fog of manufactured debt. Julian and I established an entirely new cadence to our relationship, spending quiet weekends together on the back porch as we watched the evening birds settle into the oak branches, speaking openly about our futures without the polite fictions that used to gloss over our family gatherings. He admitted with heartbreaking honesty that he had been so desperately eager to see me cared for that he had blinded himself to the glaring warning signs of Valerie's extravagant spending, completely taken in by the polished illusion she had constructed around her boutique lifestyle brand. I reminded him gently that profound grief and lingering love often make us uniquely vulnerable to anyone who promises to smooth away the sharp edges of daily survival, and that true strength lies not in never stumbling, but in refusing to let someone else dictate the terms of your existence. The house gradually lost its hollow, echoing quality, replaced once again by the steady, unhurried heartbeat of a home that belonged entirely to me.